we're going to take a walk through a piece of music. I guess this will be like a nature walk, and along the way I'll be pointing out the strange plants that are growing along the path, and I'm going to be helped by this. In fact, the bulk of the work is going to be done by the two musicians. Playing violin is Belinda Broughton, and playing viola, Kazi Pitelka. Now, the music that we're going to look at comes from a time in the late 1700s when there wasn't anything good on TV and when the movies were even worse than they are now, and even if you had an iPod, you wouldn't be able to charge it. And so for entertainment, people had to rely on each other, on other human beings, and on antique technologies like the ones we have here. Now, the particular kind of music that we're going to listen to, I call foreground music. Most music in the late 1700s, as now, was background music for something. There would be music for religious purposes, music for state occasions, music for singing, music for theatrical performances. But there was a special kind of music that was just for itself, just the pleasures of listening to that music. And for a few generations, actually for several generations, musicians and especially composers had been working out, well, how would you do this? How would you make music that lasts for a little while, that is so engaging that people will get interested in it and moved by it, even though there are no words, no story, no dancing, and the people in the audience are just sitting there experiencing this music. The piece they're going to play is a duo for violin and viola by Mozart, who was one of the best at doing this kind of foreground music, at creating things that were really interesting and touching to hear. And we're just going to walk through it. We won't hear everything that happens in the piece, but we'd just like to show you some of the events that occur. So here's how it starts, chapter 1. And right after this, the music becomes a little more tender-hearted or a little bit more introverted. But you'll hear that more outgoing music comes back, and there's alternation between kind of introversion and extroversion. Now, right after this, there's another change of mood, and the music becomes more still, you might say. Although, again, the music never stays in the same mood for very long. One of the characteristics of Mozart is that he's always fooling with us. Now, what I say might be a little bit misleading, because I'm going to point out the things along this path that I like, that I've enjoyed, or that I've noticed. But there are probably 13 squillion different ways to listen to a piece of music, and there's no one right thing to enjoy and no one thing to get. We're just going to show a few of the different kinds of pleasures that there are. In a piece like this, a great deal of the pleasure is just hearing two terrific players play, and Mozart gives lots of opportunities for them to show off. Here's a place where they're really having a conversation with each other, talking back and forth about something. Another kind of pleasure in this music, and it's such a basic pleasure that sometimes people don't even notice it, is that for some of the music, the violin is playing the main part and the viola is accompanying. One instrument in the foreground, the other in the background, and then they switch. So the viola becomes the foreground and the violin the background. Now here's a place that's just really showy. Another kind of pleasure is recognizing something that you've heard before. There's a little moment in this piece where we hear this. And just about 2 seconds later, we hear it again. It's the same thing, but changed so it's lower. Now, the music goes about this far. This whole thing takes maybe 2 minutes. And then all of the music that we've just walked through happens again. And then they'll come to a point where some new music begins to happen, something different. And there's one place where they're having something that sounds almost like an argument. There's a kind of tension here. They're even arguing over what key should the music be in, what notes should we be using here. And the music is wandering around, and eventually it starts finding its way back to the original material. And one of the pleasures of this particular period of music is a moment when, after the adventures have happened, the music comes back to the beginning sounds of the piece. It feels like coming home. We'll meet again the different moods and personalities that we met at the beginning of the piece, except sometimes they'll have changed a little bit in the course of their adventure. And here's one place where the music begins like something we heard before, and then it goes off in a different direction, almost runs off the rails. And then somehow this first movement, this first chapter, is going to need to end. And here's how Mozart ends it. Now, the second chapter, the second movement of the piece, begins, as you might remember, with that beautiful floating violin melody. During the course of this movement, we'll hear that melody come back a few times. And that, again, is maybe the most basic, fundamental musical pleasure, is recognizing something that happened. But in order to come back, we have to go away for a little while. So right after this, the character changes, another mood change, and we have this kind of sound. the viola gets to play the melody. So here's the viola playing that same tune with the violin accompanying. After this, we hear some music. I think this is, for all of us, one of our favorite spots, partly because of the notes Mozart chooses, and partly because it sounds like more than two players, because Belinda is at times playing two notes at once. A bit later, we hear that same melody that we started with, this time played by the violin down low. Now, after taking us to this sort of floating emotional space, this kind of celestial music, it takes a while to get back down to earth. And Mozart does several endings to finish up this piece. One doesn't seem to be enough, and we'd like to show you that sequence of endings. So here's one. Doesn't feel quite like a final enough ending, so he does that ending again, but with a more elaborate violin part. And he felt like that wasn't quite final enough, so he has one more ending. And even that wasn't quite enough for him. Maybe he was being paid by the note. I don't know. But finally, the music settles to earth. And it's wonderful in the context to hear how this sequence of endings gradually calms us down, lets us know to get out of that mood so we can be ready for the mood of the third movement. The third chapter of the piece starts like this. This movement is called a rondo. A rondo is a piece in which there's usually a kind of cheerful mood and a tune that keeps popping up. It's a little bit like the structure of the slow movement as well, of this second movement. So each time the rondo comes back, you hear it played first by the violin and then by the viola. And then, of course, it goes into some other kind of music. And part of the fun in a rondo is figuring out, or is hearing how the composer brings back that tune. And here's one way it happens. when you hear that, you're really meant to go, ah, yes, I know that. There's a misconception about classical music that it's really smart or you have to be super intelligent or knowledgeable or something, but it's really this kind of basic stuff that makes the pleasure of this kind of piece. Ah, yes, I've heard that before. Now, there's a point in this rondo when Mozart goes off into a really different key. All kinds of notes that haven't appeared in this piece start dominating the music. And I get the impression that Mozart is trying to lure us into forgetting what kind of piece we're in, or even what piece it is, that we'll forget there was ever a rondo tune. So when he brings it back, it'll be a big surprise. And don't worry, you will get to hear the viola play the theme also. We'll save that for later. There's the very last time that the rondo tune appears, it's up higher, and I think it's fun just to listen to that difference. And that is the ending of Mozart's duo in G major for violin and viola.